My name is Kevin, and this is the story my grandfather told me many years ago. My grandfather was a trucker, a hardened man who had spent over 30 years on the road. He'd seen it all: strange sights, bizarre accidents, and stories that would make most men turn their rigs around. Trucker folklore is full of eerie tales, creatures lurking in the woods or evil spirits wandering highways, but my grandfather never put much stock in them. He admitted that fatigue could play tricks on the mind, but what he experienced that night in the Appalachian Mountains? Well, he knew he wasn't seeing things, and he knew he wasn't crazy. It happened on a lonely stretch of road deep in the mountains, the kind of place where cell service was non-existent, and the nearest town was a distant memory. The night was thick with fog, and he had been driving for hours when something darted onto the road. He barely had time to react. With a sickening thud, his truck struck whatever it was, sending it sprawling way across the side of the road. Thinking it was a deer, he cursed under his breath and pulled over. It was common in these parts: deer and other animals leaping into the road, sometimes too quick to avoid. He grabbed his flashlight, stepped out of the cab, and walked toward the crumpled shape. But as he got closer, something felt wrong. The thing on the ground wasn't a deer. It was massive, too large for any animal he knew. Before he could process what he was looking at, it moved. With an unnatural swiftness, the creature sprang to its feet and with a single inhuman leap vanished into the woods, though it was still close enough for him to make out its massive, hulking frame. His breath caught in his throat. He only caught a glimpse, but what he saw chilled him to his core. A towering figure, hunched yet powerful, with glowing eyes that burned like embers. The eyes weren't just looking at him, they were sizing him up, threatening him. He backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at him to run. And then, as if breaking free from whatever trance had held him, he bolted. He barely made it to the truck, slamming the door shut and locking it. His hands were shaking as he fumbled with the keys, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was about to pull off when he saw it again, this time in his side mirror. The creature was running toward his truck, sprinting at an insane speed. He jammed his foot on the gas. The tires screeched as the truck lurched forward, but it wasn't fast enough. He felt the impact as the creature leaped onto the back of his rig, the whole truck shuddering under its weight. For a moment he thought it was over, but then, just as suddenly, the weight disappeared. He caught a glimpse of the monstrous form tumbling off the back in his rearview mirror. He didn't stop and didn't look back. Adrenaline carried him miles down the road until flashing red and blue lights forced him to pull over. A young state trooper approached, his hand resting on his holster, likely unnerved by the sheer panic on my grandfather's face. My grandfather tried to explain what had happened, but the officer just gave him a long, skeptical look, his expression hardening. He scoffed and accused my grandfather of being drunk, saying the wild story was just an excuse to get out of trouble. No one in their right mind would believe a tale like that. Still, he agreed to check the back of the truck, and that's when the skepticism faded. There, deep in the metal, were long, jagged claw marks, not scratches, not dents. Deep, violent gouges that no animal should have been able to make. The trooper didn't say much after that, just gave my grandfather a strange look, muttered something about these mountains being old and things out here we don't understand, then told him to drive safe. My grandfather swore every word of this was true. He said the locals know, strange things happen in those mountains, things that have been whispered about for generations. If my grandfather were alive today, he wouldn't care whether you believed him or not, and he would always end the story with the same warning. If you ever see something in the road at night, don't stop. Whatever you do, do not get out of the truck. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to stick around for more chilling true tales. And if you've ever had an experience like this, share it in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Now, back to the nightmare narratives that will make you think twice before ever truck driving at night again. I was never a religious person and considered myself a realist. I thought all that stuff was just a bunch of mumbo-jumbo. But the events I'm about to share, they made a believer out of me. It was late November, and the desert night had a biting chill. I pulled my rig into a small isolated rest area off the highway, the kind of place you only stop at when exhaustion hits harder than the loneliness of the open road. There were a few trucks parked, their silhouettes barely visible under the dim light of a single flickering lamppost. Not a tourist spot, just a forgotten patch of asphalt surrounded by endless desert. By 9 p.m., I killed the engine and climbed into the sleeper cab, the quiet settling heavy around me. Outside, the stars gleamed coldly. It was the kind of silence you only find in the middle of nowhere. I pulled the blankets over myself and fell fast asleep. Somewhere past midnight, I jolted awake, a sound, faint at first, a slow rhythmic scraping, like metal on metal. My heart pounded. I stayed still, listening. The noise circled my truck, deliberate and steady. It wasn't the wind, it was something else. Every instinct told me to stay hidden. I pulled the blanket tighter and listened. Then came the banging, loud, forceful thuds against the side of my cab. The whole truck rocked with the impact. It rocked with such violent force, and the sounds it made were so unnatural that it could not have been human. My breath quickened. I scrambled to check my phone, but of course no signal. Another bang echoed through the cabin. My mind raced. Was someone or something trying to break in? My eyes darted to the windows, but I couldn't see anything through the thick darkness. Then I heard it, a whisper, low and guttural, like a voice carried by the wind. But the words were distorted, impossible to understand. My hands shook. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my voice refused to come. The banging grew fiercer, as if whatever was outside was determined to get in. I started to freak out. And then, amidst the panic, a memory surfaced. My grandmother's voice, gentle, steady. She was a devout woman, always telling me, "When you're in trouble, call on Jesus." I had never been religious, never thought much of those words. But in that moment, with fear crushing me, I did the only thing I could think of. "Jesus, please, help me!" I screamed with all my might. And just like that, the noise stopped. The truck fell silent. The air felt thick, like the world itself had been holding its breath. I stayed frozen, listening, nothing. Minutes passed, then hours. Slowly, the sky began to lighten, the first rays of dawn creeping over the horizon. I cautiously peeked out the side mirrors. The other trucks were still there, their drivers seemingly undisturbed. No damage, no sign of whatever had been outside. As the other truckers began to stir, I stepped out towards one of them and flagged him down, an older man with a weathered face. I asked him if he'd heard anything strange last night. He shook his head. "Not a peep," he said, eyeing me curiously. "Slept right through." I nodded, forcing a smile, but my mind raced. How could no one else have heard all of that? Well, turns out, that wasn't the only bizarre thing that happened. As I walked back to my truck, the morning light cast long shadows across the dirt. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach turn. There were no tracks, no animal prints, no footprints, nothing, except for my own, leading to the cab. Whatever had been there last night had left no trace. I shared my encounter with a few other trucker friends back home. Some called it pure luck that I made it out safely. Others said it was all in my head, but I know what I heard. I thought I'd never be religious and thought prayer was pointless. However, that experience, well, it changed everything. Literally scared the hell out of me. I'm far from perfect, but ever since that night, I try my best to walk the straight and narrow. Nowadays, every time I leave the house, I pray for a safe trip. And, well, thank God, I haven't had a single problem since. Many years ago, when I was still a young rookie trucker, I had agreed to take on one last cross-country drop-off before I could finally take a week off. I was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that makes your bones ache and your eyes burn, but I really needed the money. The snowstorm had slowed me down more than I expected, and after hours of fighting the icy roads, I finally gave in and pulled over at a small rest stop. I told myself I'd nap for 20 minutes, maybe 30, but when I woke up it was dark. The snow had eased, but a thick fog clung to the ground. My phone buzzed with missed calls. I'd slept for over 2 hours. Like an idiot, I forgot to set my alarm. Cursing under my breath, I climbed back into the cab and hit the road, hoping to make up some lost time. The highway was empty. No taillights, no headlights, just an endless stretch of snow-dusted asphalt. My rig rumbled through the silence, and the hum of the engine was the only sound keeping me company. I had passed a road sign a few miles back, marking the route leading toward the next town. The number on the sign stirred something in my memory, childhood stories of strange sightings and eerie encounters along this stretch. I shook it off as just some stupid local folklore, just the kind of tales people tell to spook each other. I went to reach for the radio knob when I noticed it. A pair of headlights appeared in my side mirror. At first I figured it was another trucker, maybe someone running late like I was. The light stayed back, keeping a steady distance. I didn't think much of it until they didn't pass. Mile after mile, the light stayed with me. Close enough to see, but far enough to feel unsettling. I switched lanes. The headlights followed. I sped up. So did they. My pulse quickened, but I told myself it was nothing. Just another driver, probably bored and zoning out like I was. Then came the flash. Bright, blinding. The high beams flicked on and stayed on. I squinted, adjusting my mirrors, but it was no use. They just kept shining, burning into my rear view. I gritted my teeth and grabbed the CB radio and yelled, "Hey, cut the lights before you blind someone." There was nothing, just static. My knuckles went white against the steering wheel. I was getting angry now, but just as I was about to lay on the horn, the lights disappeared. Gone, just like that. I checked my mirrors, scanning the empty road behind me. There was no car, no sign of anyone. It was like they'd never been there. Maybe I was just tired seeing things, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. A few miles later, I saw it again. Not the headlights this time. Something else. A figure. Dark and barely visible through the fog, standing just beyond the guardrail. It was tall, motionless. As I drove past, it twisted its head ever so slightly, following me, watching. My hands trembled on the wheel. I kept driving, refusing to look back. But every few miles, I'd see it again, then again. Always standing, always staring. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe an hour, maybe more. The figure never moved, never chased. It just appeared, like it wanted me to know it was there. Finally, I saw the lights of a truck stop ahead. Relief flooded me. I pulled in, parked, and sat there, my chest heaving. I checked the mirrors. Nothing. Shaking, I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching against the icy gravel. The air was still. Too still. I forced myself to look around, half expecting to see it lurking in the shadows. I quickly went inside and sat in a booth in the corner, away from the window. After a moment, a waitress came over and poured me a cup of coffee. I could see her eyes linger on me, likely noticing how pale I looked. Before I could take a sip, an older man at the counter turned to look at me. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he knew something I didn't. He said it was clear from my face that I'd seen it. He said the locals call it the one that follows. Some say it's a ghost, others say worse. But whatever it is, it always finds the ones who drive these roads alone. My stomach twisted. He warned me to be careful. Once it knows you've seen it, it doesn't forget. I didn't say a word, just drank my coffee. My hands trembled against the cup. I gripped it tighter, hoping no one would notice how badly I was shaking. The fear clung to me, thick and suffocating, so I whispered a silent prayer. Not for strength, not for courage, but just to make it to my destination without seeing that thing again. Just a few more miles to go, I mumbled to myself. As I left the diner, climbed back into my rig and headed out to my destination, the silence of the empty road felt heavier than before. Fortunately, I didn't see what they called the one that follows anymore that night. From that moment until now, years later, I'm telling you the truth. No amount of money would ever be worth driving through that cursed stretch of road again.